What if I told you that one civilization became so feared that entire city surrendered the moment its armies appeared on the horizon? A civilization that built pyramids out of skulls, that turned warfare into ritual, that sacrificed thousands of people in public ceremonies, while drums echoed through massive stone cities. A civilization so ruthless that even its enemies believed the end of the world had arrived. Today, we're diving into one of the most terrifying empires in human history, the civilization many historians consider the most brutal ever, the Aztec Empire. But brutality alone doesn't explain how they rose, because behind the bloodshed was a civilization of incredible intelligence, advanced engineering, powerful military strategy, and a worldview unlike anything the modern world has ever seen. They were builders, warriors, poets, priests, and executioners. This is the rise and terrifying reign of the Aztecs, and how one of history's most feared civilizations collapsed almost overnight. The story of the Aztecs begins with wandering outsiders. Around the 1200s, a nomadic people known as the Mexica arrived in the Valley of Mexico. At the time, the region was already crowded with powerful city-states, fighting constantly for land and influence. The Mexica were poor and homeless. They were despised by the established powers around them. According to legend, they wandered for years, searching for a sign from their gods. They were told they would find their destined homeland when they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. Eventually, they claimed they found that sign on a swampy island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. It looked like one of the worst places imaginable to build a city. Most people would have walked away. The Mexica stayed, and from that muddy island, they built one of the greatest cities on earth, Tenochtitlan, the future capital of the Aztec Empire. At first, the Mexica survived as mercenaries. They fought wars for stronger rulers nearby, earning a reputation for savage effectiveness. They became known for their discipline, their aggression, and their willingness to terrorize enemies. And slowly, they gained power. By the early 1400s, the Mexica formed alliances with neighboring cities and launched brutal campaigns of conquest across central Mexico. This alliance became known as the Triple Alliance, and it marked the birth of the Aztec Empire. But unlike many empires built only on territory or wealth, the Aztecs were driven by something darker: religion. To understand Aztec brutality, you have to understand what they believed. The Aztecs saw the universe as fragile. They believed the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and in return, humanity owed the gods a debt paid in blood. Without sacrifice, they believed the sun itself would stop rising. The world would collapse into darkness. Human sacrifice wasn't just tradition. To the Aztecs, it was survival. Their most important god was Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. And according to Aztec belief, he required constant nourishment, human hearts. This belief transformed warfare into something horrifying. Most ancient civilizations fought wars for land, gold, or political power. The Aztecs fought wars for prisoners. Capturing enemies alive became more important than killing them, because prisoners could be sacrificed. Victorious armies marched captives back to Tenochtitlan in chains. Then came the ceremonies. Thousands gathered in massive public squares. Priests painted in black ash climbed the steep temple pyramids, with victims beside them. At the top, the prisoner was stretched across a stone altar. A priest used an obsidian blade sharper than steel. Then, the victim's chest was cut open. The heart was ripped out while still beating, and raised toward the sky. The body was often thrown down the pyramid steps below. Modern historians still debate the true scale of these sacrifices. Some estimates suggest thousands were killed every year. Others claim major ceremonies may have involved tens of thousands. Whatever the exact numbers were, The fear they created was very real. Entire populations lived in terror of becoming sacrifice victims. And the Aztecs understood the psychological power of that fear. Brutality became a weapon. Ironically, the civilization responsible for some of history's most horrifying rituals also built one of the most impressive cities in the world. At its peak, Tenochtitlan may have held over 200,000 people. That made it larger than most European cities at the time. Spanish conquerors who first saw it were stunned. They described gleaming temples rising from the lake, massive causeways connecting the city to the mainland, canals crowded with canoes carrying food, flowers, weapons, and merchants. Some compared it to Venice. Others said it looked like a dream. The Aztecs engineered floating agricultural islands called chinampas. These artificial farms transformed shallow lake water into incredibly productive farmland. It allowed the empire to feed huge populations. Markets inside Tenochtitlan sold everything imaginable: gold, textiles, exotic animals, jewelry, food, weapons, and even slaves. The city was organized, clean, and highly advanced. Aqueducts brought fresh water into the capital. Public order was strict. Crime could be punished harshly. Even nobles faced execution for certain offenses. Education existed for both boys and girls. Poetry and philosophy were respected. Aztec rulers surrounded themselves with scholars and artists, which creates a disturbing contradiction. How could a civilization capable of such beauty also normalize mass human sacrifice? The answer lies in how deeply violence was woven into Aztec society. Everything revolved around war. Military success determined status. Young boys were raised to become warriors. Capturing enemies earned honor. Failure brought shame. The empire itself depended on conquest. Defeated cities were forced to pay tribute. Food, goods, weapons, luxury items, and sometimes people. If a city resisted, the consequences could be devastating. One of the strangest and most terrifying aspects of Aztec society was something called the Flower Wars. These were ritualized wars, fought partly for sacrifice victims. Instead of annihilating enemies completely, certain conflicts were designed to capture prisoners. Warriors competed for captives almost like trophies. The more prisoners a soldier captured, the greater his social status became. Elite warriors wore elaborate animal-themed armor. Jaguar and eagle warriors. They became symbols of terror across Mesoamerica. Enemies knew what defeat could mean. Not just death, but sacrifice. Some historians believe the Aztecs intentionally used public sacrifice to intimidate rival states. And it worked. Fear spread across the region, but fear also created hatred. Many conquered peoples despised Aztec rule. Heavy tribute demands drained cities. Families lived under the constant threat of violence. And while the Aztecs became stronger, resentment grew beneath the surface. That resentment would eventually destroy the empire. But before that happened, the Aztecs reached unimaginable power. By the early 1500s, the Aztec Empire dominated central Mexico, and on the throne sat one of its most famous rulers, Montezuma II. He ruled over millions of people. Tribute flowed endlessly into Tenochtitlan. The empire seemed unstoppable, but strange omens reportedly began appearing. According to later accounts, priests claimed they saw signs of disaster, comets in the sky, temples burning mysteriously, visions of destruction. Whether these stories were exaggerated after the empire's fall is still debated. But in 1519, something arrived that changed everything. Foreign ships appeared on the eastern coast. The men who stepped ashore wore metal armor, carried thunderous weapons, and rode animals the Aztecs had never seen before. Horses. Their leader was Hernán Cortés, and with him came fewer than 1,000 Spanish conquistadors. At first glance, The odds looked ridiculous. How could a tiny foreign force threaten one of the largest empires in the Americas? But the Spanish had advantages the Aztecs didn't understand yet. Steel weapons, gunpowder, diseases, and perhaps most importantly, allies. Because many native groups hated the Aztecs, the Spanish quickly realized this. They formed alliances with enemies of the empire, especially the Tlaxcalans. Thousands joined Cortés, not because they loved the Spanish, but because they wanted revenge against the Aztecs. The empire's brutality had created too many enemies. When Cortés finally entered Tenochtitlan, even the Spanish were overwhelmed. The city was unlike anything they had ever seen. Temples towered above the lake. Markets stretched endlessly. Causeways crossed the water like giant stone bridges. For a brief moment, Montezuma welcomed the newcomers. Historians still debate why. Some believe he hoped diplomacy could avoid disaster. Others think he underestimated the threat. Whatever the reason, it didn't last. Tensions exploded. Violence broke out inside the city. The Spanish took Montezuma hostage. Then chaos consumed Tenochtitlan. At one point, Spanish forces massacred Aztec nobles during a religious ceremony. The city erupted in fury. Street fighting engulfed the capital. Eventually, the Spanish tried to flee during a disastrous retreat known as La Noche Triste. Hundreds died while escaping the city at night. Aztec warriors attacked relentlessly from canoes and rooftops. But the Spanish returned. And this time, they brought an even deadlier ally: smallpox. The disease spread rapidly through the population. The Aztecs had no immunity. Entire communities collapsed. Warriors, priests, nobles, and children. People died in horrifying numbers. The empire weakened at the exact moment it faced invasion. In 1521, the Spanish launched the final siege of Tenochtitlan. For months, the city endured starvation, disease, and relentless attacks. Causeways were destroyed. Water supplies were cut off. Bodies filled the canals. The once glorious capital became a nightmare. And finally, it fell. The Spanish tore the city apart. Temples were destroyed. Aztec rule ended. One of the most powerful civilizations in the Americas collapsed in just a few years. So were the Aztecs truly the most brutal civilization in history? That depends on how we define brutality. Human sacrifice on the scale practiced by the Aztecs was undeniably horrifying. Public executions, ritual killings, psychological terror, constant warfare. It created an image of fear that still fascinates people centuries later. But history is complicated. The Mongols slaughtered entire cities. The Assyrians used mass torture and public executions to terrify enemies. The Spartans built their society on extreme violence and oppression. Countless empires committed atrocities. The Aztecs weren't uniquely cruel by ancient standards. What made them different was how openly ritualized the violence became. Sacrifice wasn't hidden. It was public, sacred, celebrated. To modern audiences, that makes the civilization especially shocking. But there's another side to the story often ignored. The Aztecs also created remarkable achievements: architecture, engineering, agriculture, art, philosophy, poetry. Their society was sophisticated and highly organized. And much of what we know about them comes from Spanish accounts written after the conquest. Some historians argue the Spanish exaggerated Aztec brutality to justify their own invasion. After all, the conquistadors themselves committed horrific violence. Entire populations were wiped out during colonization. So the truth is more complicated than simple good versus evil. The Aztecs were both brilliant and terrifying, advanced and brutal, human and monstrous. Like many powerful civilizations throughout history. Centuries after their fall, the Aztecs still capture the world's imagination, partly because their story feels almost unreal. A massive island city rising from a lake. warriors dressed as jaguars and eagles, temples stained with blood, a civilization destroyed by a tiny foreign force. It sounds like mythology, but it happened, and their legacy still survives today. Modern Mexico itself traces part of its identity back to the Mexica people. The eagle on cactus symbol from Aztec legend appears on the Mexican flag. Archaeologists continue uncovering ruins beneath modern Mexico City. Every discovery reveals more about how advanced the civilization truly was. Massive temples, hidden tunnels, ceremonial offerings, human remains. The deeper researchers dig, the more complex the Aztecs become. They weren't simply bloodthirsty savages, like early European stories claimed. Nor were they peaceful visionaries. They were an empire, and like many empires, they used fear, violence, and power to survive. But eventually, the same brutality that helped them rise also helped destroy them. Because when the Spanish arrived, too many people wanted the Aztecs gone. The Aztecs built one of the greatest cities on Earth. They mastered engineering, created powerful armies, dominated an empire. But they also turned violence into ritual, and fear into power. For some, they were history's greatest monsters. For others, they were victims of colonial propaganda. The truth lies somewhere in between. But one thing is certain. Few civilizations left behind a legacy as terrifying or as unforgettable. And in the end, even the most feared empire couldn't escape collapse. Because history has a pattern. Every civilization rises. Every civilization falls. And sometimes, the most brutal empires leave the darkest shadows behind. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to Rise and Ruin for more stories about history's greatest empires, lost civilizations, and catastrophic collapses. And let me know in the comments, what civilization do you think was the most terrifying in human history? Thanks for watching. Until next time, this has been Rise and Ruin.